Good evening and welcome to another episode of In the Trees with your host, Matt
and Derek.
And on tonight's episode, we are going to discuss the possibility of one of the most endearing mysteries of the known modern world. Is there an inner Earth? Derek, what do you happen to think about that?
Well, I'm not too versed also in Antarctica.
Yeah.
However you want to say it. I know more stuff about how there's a lot of, not really too much people can go onto Antarctica. You have to have permission. You can't leave basically anything behind. Anything you bring, you have to take with you. I know it's weird to how many countries have peace treaties and not doing anything there, and a large massive land that could basically do anything. There's almost 8 billion people on this earth, maybe 7.5 billion. And there's only at most 1,000 people in Antarctica.
Yeah, at any given point.
And just the fact that, there's just not much actual stuff that they will allow out. I don't really trust actual media nowadays. It seems like the more the internet's coming out, the more that media can't hide what, they once could hide without internet. So,
right.
And, just beyond what, maybe you see in movies and TV shows, beyond just those things. Not super versed beyond just what I might have looked up prior to this recording, just to kind of get versed in the topic.
Yeah, you remember Brendan Fraser in Journey to the Center of the Earth?
I do remember that movie.
Okay,
not too well, but I know the whole ideal behind that one. I think there were dinosaurs in it as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The popular theory that I've become familiarized with is that Earth is actually not a center core of molten iron like we believe it to be. It actually has its own inner atmosphere, apparently, and this was just recently, as a matter of fact, just to touch on what we know mainstream, scientists recently discovered pockets of water with more water underneath the crust of our oceans than there are on the oceans on the surface. Did you know that?
No.
Okay, so
I'm sure that probably has to do with a lot of the frozen caps being heated up by volcanic activity, or just being that close to allegedly that just volcanic activity heating up, oxygenizing the water, oxygenating, whatever that.
Yeah, right.
I'm not a scientist, guys. No.
Right. Well, it leads credence to this theory that there could be a highly advanced civilization. So the theory goes is that when catastrophe hit Earth in the last Diluvian age, 12,800 years ago, roughly,
post-flood or Diluvian?
During the flood.
Yeah,
right.
See,
the flood
I
caused
from last episode.
Right. The flood caused this civilization that was highly advanced, living in Antarctica, to go underground. And basically, Antarctica is basically the mainstay topic of what we're talking about, because there's supposedly holes in the North and the South Pole, from what I understand. Now, there's only been a couple of actual, what you would call verifiable witnesses. I believe one man's named Richard Admiral Byrd. We'll talk about him later, but him. And there's been a couple other excavation, people that have come forward and saying there's a massive gaping hole at the South Pole where land should be, and we're talking 2 to 3 football fields in width, not something that's just the Kola borehole. The deepest hole we've ever actually dug was by the Russians apparently back in the 80s, called the Kola borehole. They got 7 miles down. This is supposed to be a hole that actually goes in. Richard Admiral Byrd actually testified that he was able to fly his plane while scouting that area for the U.S. military at one point. But he even went back to Antarctica at one other point for a mission for the military. But even supposedly the Germans, back in World War II, were the first to ever produce a manned trip to Antarctica under a civilized nation of the modern era. And they discovered a lot of things that are still to this day unknown, as you said. And I think we should play the clip about what that one guy. Folks, we have a clip for you today. Roll the clip.
Amundsen Scott South Pole Base.
So
there's a huge no-fly zone over one of the portions
one of the only to ever go to
of the South Pole. And this corresponds with what some of the whistleblowers that have spoken to Linda Moulton Howe have said, that there's a huge hole under the ice right near there, that this is some kind of entrance into the inner Earth, or just some kind of massive cavity that goes below the polar plateau.
Now, Admiral Byrd, when he made his so-called discovery of the hollow Earth, was going in through the North Pole, I believe, right?
and it's presumed that there are holes on both of the top and the bottom. Dr. Brooks Agnew is a good friend of mine, and we're looking at doing an expedition to
He's been working on that. He
the North
wanted
Pole.
to get
You see, what he was talking about there, that's, by the way, one of the only researchers, a civilian, because like me and you, right now, bro, we can't go to Antarctica to go look at this stuff for ourselves, nor can you go to the North Pole. Reasons being, well, I don't know.
Only
But
really rich people can.
right, and in fact, play the clip about him wanting to go to the North Pole because he's a renowned researcher. He just said himself he's been to the South Pole. Play the clip about him going to the North Pole.
and it's presumed that there are holes on both of the top and the bottom. Dr. Brooks Agnew is a good friend of mine, and we're looking at doing an expedition to
He's been working on that. He
The North
wanted
Pole
to
region,
he wanted
yeah.
to rent a Russian trawler to get down there.
He wants me to go with him, and we're going to take a look. He says he has the coordinates of the hole in the North Pole, and we know where
Not yet.
the hole of the South Pole is. My only concern is we're probably not going to be allowed to go.
Yeah,
See-
I think they definitely don't allow people to do stuff like that.
So, it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, where there's news articles and news clippings, like the ones we did about ghosts and giants and everything. There's so many articles back in the day talking about all this stuff, about how Admiral Byrd went down there and got his butt whooped, how, when he went down there for Operation High Jump, which, by the way, Operation High Jump had like 4,700 men go down there. This is post-World War II in Europe. Admiral Byrd, 4,700 armed forces, 13 battleships, like 11 aircraft, or an armada.
Basically a Michael Bay movie almost. Worth
Right.
of ships and
Went down
armadas
there.
and military people. There's
Right.
a lot.
And they went down there, and within 6 months were on their way back because they were getting wiped out. And what they described, and we're talking about servicemen, guys that are spending years on the ocean, years of military experience, not just Joe Bob, coming down the street and saying, "Oh, I saw a flying UFO with a tinfoil hat." We're talking about experienced military people that are credible witnesses, in my opinion, that saw some USOs, as they call them, and coming out of the ground, or coming out of the ocean, I apologize, and really just wreaking havoc on the modern day warfare, decades, if not centuries above and beyond what we had at our hands as the U.S. military at that time. But going back to what he was talking about there, the North Pole not having a contingent piece of land that's permanently in place because it floats really is a lot harder for them to study. But, like he said, there's only 25 to 30 countries that have military bases down there, or research bases, I'm sorry. But, again, you're talking about 25 to 50 bases, and it just so happens the U.S. military has the South Pole base. And Linda Moulton Howe, like he was talking about, is a renowned researcher, and she does a lot of controversial subjects and stuff. She's interviewed people. We'll have to find the video on this. She's actually interviewed former military servicemen that swear by this 900-foot hole being at the dead geographical center of the coordinates of the South Pole, and that, modern-day Google just whitewashes it. You're never going to see
And
it.
if you look closely enough on these maps and globes, it says your mom. Okay. But no, a lot of it. I mean, I think a lot of times, like you mentioned, you got to find these really old maps where they're show like if you get post World War, I think as pre World War II maps, or even a little bit prior, like during those type of maps, you'll see that there was a lot of German activity on the Antarctic, and that they've been claimed and all this other junk.
Yeah, New Schwabenland. They actually still have the oldest base on Antarctica known to this day, but everybody says the Kohler base, or Koger base, however you pronounce it, was built in the 80s. And there's a lot of evidence that it was around since the 30s and has never gone away. But that's, again, you have to have explicit permission from that specific country's diplomatic, government. It's like going down to an embassy, basically. Each country has its own base. Each base is its own country. Same analogy. But going back to the Hollow Earth theory, the Germans believed that a highly advanced race of human beings, or ones that had survived the Diluvian flood, had gone underground to basically create a new Earth. They discovered that, the old us, the old human race, discovered that we could actually travel and traverse the inner Earth and outer Earth. And when things went to shit, they decided to go to the inner Earth and keep their advanced secrets to themselves. Robert,
We're going off the deep end, guys. So just bear with us. Come on for the ride.
I'm
This
just
is
saying.
a ride, y'all.
Robert Byrd swears that he was escorted. Once he got to the South Pole, to the hole, he swears that his plane was escorted and he met this advanced civilization. Now, we're talking about an admiral, bro. We're not talking about a chump. We're talking about a very reputable man. Swears he met an intelligent alien species that looked very human, but weren't quite human.
Well, I think I remember watching a video just recently about, this kind of subject about how there's massive lakes that are just ginormous in Antarctica, and they're separated by huge mass amounts of land and underneath layers of freaking ice.
Underground lakes, yeah,
and
fresh water.
They're basically fresh water. They have oxygenated water from the volcanic, water underneath, all the activity underneath. It has a whole ecosystem that could survive, and it's been basically separated for eons at this point in time from the rest of it all. So I can understand where the theory of maybe possibly another life or even advanced life could definitely live in that environment, because there's a whole ecosystem worth of environmental, or not environmental, but animals and things you could feed off, live. I get that.
Yeah,
totally.
And it's common knowledge nowadays that we as a modern human species have dug underground. We have deep underground military bases, deep underground survival complexes, all these things
They're
that
called
we
dumbs.
Right. We'll talk about that at another point. But we, as the surface dwelling species, have already discovered the benefits of being underground. What's to say somebody that didn't survive? Because 12,800 years ago, we got wiped off the planet. We had comet impacts. We had instantaneous flooding. The sea level rose 500 feet in less than 3 years.
Yeah, I think there was
Can you imagine?
I've seen videos where they talk about how there's type of rocks that were found on top of the mountains that you usually only find in
Sedimentary rocks. Yeah.
that you only find in oceans and stuff like that.
And the fact that Antarctica has maps of it that were showing land at some point, a lot of people say the Germans found a undisturbed, you would call it a paradise, really.
Yeah.
And it all leads screens. But you remember what we were talking about, where the news back in the day would actually tell the story. We have another clip for you guys. Listen to this reporter from the 1960s, 1970s, and listen to what she has to say. This is back in the day when people did not fear being prosecuted and ridiculed. Listen to what she has to say. Roll the clip.
Situation that has been brewing for a long, long time, and I'm going into the history down there and the predictions of Admiral Byrd in 1946 and 1947 that World War III would start down in Antarctica by the Falkland Islands with Argentine, Antarctica, and in that area. He knew and said in a press conference, two press conferences in Santiago, Chile in March of 1947, again in July 1947, that World War III would be set off down in that area.
Look what he's talking about.
Well, when Admiral Byrd got home, he was met by James Forrestal, the Secretary of Defense. 2 years later, Forrestal was murdered, thrown out of a window at Bethesda Hospital 2 months after he got a distinguished medal from Eisenhower. Forrestal was with Admiral Byrd on consultations. Byrd went down to see if Eisenhower and the Russians were correct that Adolf Hitler was down in Antarctica building secret weapons and so forth. All of the papers of Admiral Byrd are locked up, top secret to this day. They're not available of what he saw, and right after he was met by Forrestal, shortly after that, Forrestal was murdered. And I'll give you the references on some of the books on the death of Forrestal and the meeting with Admiral Byrd. First of all, the Guinness Book of Records at the end of World War II, the greatest unsolved robbery was at the end of the war when the Reichsbank treasury was emptied of all its money and the bank vaults in Berlin were completely emptied out, and the headquarters for the World Monetary Fund in Basel, Switzerland, found that they had $15 billion in circulation that shouldn't exist. There was forged money. The code name was Operation Bernhardt. There were expert forgers. And so that this is the kind of money that could finance the operations that they're describing in this book. The prelude to the operations was that the money was available and somebody was making the equipment for these people that this book is writing about and manufacturing secret weapons for the future. Now, this book claims that Hitler planned far ahead to have a colony down in Antarctica. And if you buy the maps put out by National Geographic, 1957, there's a map of Hitler staking in 1939, 1937, his territory in Antarctica. He sent polar expeditions out. This book says the secret Nazi expeditionary force was headed by Captain Reicher, R-I-T-S-C-H-E-R, and took place 1937 and 38, their first expeditions. They landed in the Queen Maud land and established bases there. They took over 11,000 photographs for map purposes and had a swastika flag dropped every 20 kilometers to substantiate the German claim that they had this land in Antarctica. It was a terrain claimed by Germany itself for the first time, and they found warm lakes, an ice-free oasis, and an area, an unexplored area before that they gave German names, the mountains and the plateaus and so forth. It was free of ice, and there were warm lakes in this area, and other books that I have show the drawings. Now, added to the credence to these bases are the remarks of Mr. von Ribbentrop, this book says, at the outbreak of the war, World War II. In accordance with Germany's long-range political strategy, we have taken into firm possession the Antarctic area called the New Swabia, and it will be and ensure a safe retreat in case of necessity, Mr. Ribbentrop said at the beginning of World War II. And this book has maps of the Byrd expedition going down after the war.
Okay. So, it really lends credence to there's been a lot of modern effort and monetary resources that have gone into researching what's down there. And specifically with the South Pole being a entry-exit, and the same thing with the North Pole being an entry-exit, there's another substantial theory. Do you know what an aurora borealis is? The northern lights, where you see the green. So theory is that's magnetism, basically, at working in the atmosphere. Without there being an open hole, there'd be no way for the magnet to complete the circuit. So aurora borealis, theoretically, proves to you, in one way or another, that there's got to be some sort of free-flowing current from the North Pole to the South Pole for that magnetic loop to be completed, whether it be unobstructed or not.
We didn't get that far in this study.
Again, but the Germans at that time were the most advanced civilization on the planet, by far and none. They had technology that to this day has not been reverse engineered. That, by our own admittance, we're decades ahead of our.
That's why we took up all the German scientists and took them to NASA.
Right, Operation Paperclip. But it really leads credence to why did they spend so much time and effort to go down there? What ancient, because they were all into the occult, into the mysticism, into ancient mythology and stuff. So what documents did they have that gave them the idea to spend untold amounts of money and manpower to go down there and set up shop?
I can see that. I'm still pretty skeptical. A lot of this stuff is still reports from people that may or may not be even alive nowadays.
Probably not.
Exactly. So it's a lot. It's easy to say. I definitely want to do something like when I'm like 100. Like the money is under. And then die.
Right.
So I can definitely see some of this being elaborate. Maybe stretched out, or maybe even like I said, the Admiral Byrd, who doesn't even really bring it up until I think you mentioned. It's not in this episode, but just prior to recording, that he didn't even really bring it up until like. He was on his deathbed talking to his kids and stuff like that. He
was sworn to secrecy, apparently.
Which could be the case. And I know a lot of times when you're in the military, when you see something, it's above, not classified. If it's not been declassified or whatnot, and you don't have the, permission, you can get in pretty bad trouble. You get, until they basically give you permission, which now is why we're starting to see a lot more alien, clips and like, we actually did run into thing. And that might just be something still too strong. Like, there's some underground living people that are way more civilized and advanced and that goes down a whole nother conspiracy of, all these people involved in, other sayings.
It really boils down to me that we as human species could not handle not knowing that we're number one.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It would freak us out.
That's the bottom line. To find out that we are not the superior species to everything would really be an ego trip for us, and I don't think we can handle it. But going back to the entirety of it, the Hollow Earth theory has a lot of credence to it as far as further investigation and stuff. It's the limitations, I believe, that keep us from really knowing, because how many of us are going to have the resources to go down there? That's 10,000 miles away from where we're
Mr.
at.
Beast, who I think
he did go down to Antarctica.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's your Mr. Beast. You don't get to...
And just like you said, he had to clean up all his stuff.
Crap.
You're not allowed to leave a tent pole behind.
I think I saw they made like a little... They dug up a hole. They had to refill that entire hole.
Yeah.
As soon as they were done. Like, they were not letting you leave. And I'm sure they didn't even get to go past like the tourist zone.
Right, 2 miles in.
Right, exactly. It's like,
Right, and that continent is bigger than the United States 48 and part of Canada.
I think I would get blinded by the snow there.
Right, can you imagine only being able to see what? Black and blue?
Yeah.
Oh God!
And just like the reflecting sun.
I'd go crazy.
I'd just go blind from the reflecting sunlight.
Oh God! I'd have the best pair of shades, but that's definitely what I have to offer on the subject. I find it very interesting, Derek, myself, but it definitely is going to be a slow drip process. If there's anything discovered, we're going to be the last to know.
Like I said, I've heard a lot of things, from like there being the ice wall there, all the, the signing of like treaties that don't allow people to do stuff unless you have a load of money. Oh yeah, right. I can definitely see all that being the case. I'm definitely still skeptical of any living, super intelligent creatures beyond just like fish.
Of course.
I think
that's your job. You're the skeptic.
Yeah, for the most part, I try to be the skeptic sometimes, and I feel like I'm also now going into just being crazy.
That is not the case of being a believer, folks.
No, you can believe, guys. But I think that's going to wrap up for this episode, guys. I think that's episode 7 now.
Yeah, hey.
7. That's this many now.
Make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter and Reddit now, folks, at In The Trees.
And I think our Twitter is In The Trees at OKC. All underscores.
Yeah, they're both In The Trees.
Yeah.
In The Trees.
Definitely, guys. Thank you guys for listening in for this episode. If you guys have any suggestions for any future episodes, if you guys leave us a like, guys, and remember to look up. And this is In The Trees with
Matt
and Derek. See you guys next time.
Bye.